Peoria, in 1853, was a handsome little city of over 7,000 people, the Honorable Appellate Court Judge David McCulloch would recall in 1903. As the pioneers would say, the latch string was always out. Hospitality was a way of life. The unpaved streets were shaded with locust trees in the daytime and had the soft glow of oil lamps at night. The only sidewalks went from Water Street near the river up Main Street to the courthouse. The commercial district of the city centered on Water Street and crawled up Main and Adams Streets to the northwest. Each morning and evening, the tinkling of bells could be heard as family cows made their way to the upper and lower prairies in the morning and returned home at night for milking. First Presbyterian Church, founded in 1834, was in its third building at the corner of Main and Madison Streets. The Reverend Addison Coffey, a tall, wiry man, slender in build, was its pastor. Reverend Coffey was thoroughly pious and able, respected by all in the community. Alas, he was not an eloquent preacher. In 1853, he was elected commissioner to the meeting of the General Assembly of the Presbyterian Church, USA, which convened in Philadelphia. While in Philadelphia, he became gravely ill and was unable to return to his congregation in Peoria for several months. In his absence, the session, or governing board of the church, secured the services of the Reverend Robert Perry Ferris. Tall and handsome, Reverend Ferris presented his sermons in a simple, clear, and strong fashion, loyal to the Scriptures and to Christ. Upon Reverend Coffey's return to health and the city of Peoria, the session of First Presbyterian Church proposed that Reverend Coffey resume his pastoral work and that Reverend Ferris continue to do the preaching in the role of an assistant pastor. Such an arrangement was not satisfactory to Mr. Coffey, so a settlement was arranged with the Presbytery of Peoria that allowed Reverend Ferris and 28 members of First Presbyterian Church to organize the Second Presbyterian Church of Peoria. The new church was chartered on December 7, 1853. John L. Griswold and John Cooper Greer, ruling elders of First Presbyterian Church, were elected and installed as ruling elders of this church of 52 souls. Reverend Ferris acted as the stated supply pastor of the newly established church, a position he held until he was elected and installed as their pastor in 1855. 3 weeks later, a Sabbath school with 31 pupils and 10 teachers was established. Students were promised a Bible when they learned the Westminster Shorter Catechism. 23 of the 32 students earned their Bible. The congregation first met on the second floor of Haskell's Hall, which was located on the southwest corner of Madison and Main, across the street from First Presbyterian. Meanwhile, the trustees secured land on the west corner of Madison and Jackson. This wood frame building was dedicated in July of 1855. Work continued on the building until its final completion in 1874. The church secured a Mason and Hamlin melodeon before purchasing an organ from St. Paul's Episcopal Church in 1872. The new congregation shortly became involved in various mission causes. Ladies' socials were started in 1866. This eventually evolved into the Ladies' Aid Society. Later, a Young Ladies' Aid Society was also organized. There was also a sewing circle as part of an industrial school in 1870 to supply clothing to the destitute children connected to the Sabbath school. Here they also taught children how to sew and repair their own clothes. In 1876, a mission band called the Light Bearers was organized out of the Sabbath school. This was the congregation's first formal missionary organization. Out of it grew the Women's Foreign Missionary Society, which supported the ministry of the Reverend Richard Arthur and his wife, who started a school in the Indian Territory of Kansas. In 1885, the church organized a Young People's Christian Endeavor Society, a nationwide Christian education program that touched many Protestant churches. Though greatly decreased in influence today, Christian Endeavor still strives to bring the message of God's love through Jesus Christ to the young people of the world. As World War I loomed on the horizon, the women of the church organized themselves into a guild engaged not only in philanthropic work, but in making nightgowns for the Home for the Friendless, now called the Children's Home, aprons for visiting nurses, clothing for the children of the Child Welfare League, and sheets for a mission project in Tucson, Arizona. In 1921, the congregation adopted as its foreign missionary the Reverend Lloyd P. Henderson, supporting his work in Manchuria. In their early life, Second Presbyterian Church decided to organize a mission Sabbath school in a building on Washington Street between Walnut and Bridge Streets. This mission school eventually became Calvary Presbyterian Church in 1867. They laid a cornerstone at First and Fisher Streets. In a cooperative effort with First Presbyterian Church, Second Presbyterian Church was also instrumental in establishing Grace Presbyterian Church. Elder John Greer sought and received permission from the superintendent of the Rock Island Railroad to hold a Sabbath school in one of the passenger coaches that stood on the tracks on Water Street near Clay Street. Originally called the Fourth Ward Mission Sunday School, the school grew quickly. Soon a building was erected at the corner of Green and Clay Streets with the aid of the Young Men's Christian Association, the YMCA. In 1868, the Grace Mission Church was organized by the Presbytery of Peoria with 44 members. George H. McIlvaine and Theodore Higbee were elected ruling elders. Soon, Second Presbyterian Church needed a larger building. They engaged the services of William Warren Boyington, a leading architect of the time. Boyington was the architect for such buildings in Illinois as the Illinois State Penitentiary at Joliet and the old Chicago Water Tower that survived the devastating fire of 1871. His design reflects the influence of the Romanesque Revival architectural style of Boston's leading architect of the time, Henry Hobson Richardson. The 12,000-square-foot church featured heavy masonry, gables, towers, round arches, and split granite stone walls. The sanctuary was red oak and could seat 600 worshipers. 2 stained glass windows honoring the ministry of former pastors Samuel Hibben and Lewis O. Thompson were installed. These windows are now in the chapel of First Federated Church. Up until the 1890s, Protestant churches throughout the world served communion, as the earliest congregations did in the first century, using a common cup. In the late 19th century, with advances in science and the understanding of disease, coupled with frequent outbreaks of diphtheria and the spread of tuberculosis, pressure mounted to go from a common cup to sanitary individual cups. At their annual meeting in 1910, the congregation voted to adopt and provide for the individual communion service. A wooden set made by the Sanitary Communion Outfit Company of Rochester, New York, was purchased and used. In 1917, the United States entered the war to end all wars, World War I. 46 men from Second Presbyterian served in the war. Only one did not return home. Throughout the years, Second Presbyterian Church explored various options for merging with neighboring congregations. This was in part due to maintaining a viable active membership. In 1923, talks began with the Westminster Presbyterian Church on Moss Avenue. In 1913, that congregation experienced a dramatic loss of membership. Records dating from the time indicate that the wartime economy, the threat of war in Europe, and the impending draft had a demoralizing effect on the congregation. Merger talks were entered into seriously. Part of the plan was to secure a building site for a new church on the Bradley University campus. In March of 1924, the negotiations broke down and the session of Second Presbyterian Church voted to inform the session of Westminster of their decision to abandon talks. In 1932, Second Presbyterian entered into merger talks with First Presbyterian, the congregation from whom they split only a few decades earlier. Both churches voted on the merger. First Presbyterian unanimously approved the merger on January 18, 1933. Second Presbyterian voted the following Sunday and approved the merger by a 2/3 vote. The Presbytery of Peoria approved the merger at their meeting in February. However, soon after receiving approval from the Presbytery, things began to unravel and a special meeting of the Presbytery was called in March. The Presbytery minutes indicate that the minority objectors at Second Presbyterian were so adamant against leaving their building that the approval was rescinded. On March 21, 1936, First Congregational Church was destroyed by a tragic fire. By late April 1936, the Second Presbyterian Church offered the homeless First Congregational congregation the use of its facilities until such time as First Congregational made permanent plans for its future. Earlier, First Congregational Church had formed a committee of 36 to explore how they should proceed forward. They considered 3 merger proposals, one from First Presbyterian, one from Westminster Presbyterian, and another from the Union Congregational Church. Behind the scenes, there were formal and informal talks between First Congregational and Second Presbyterian as the congregations of both churches had dwindled over the years. Discussions came to a climax when the women of the church took matters into their own hands. On November 13, 1936, Irma Gamble of First Congregational visited the home of Bertha Heydrich Miles of Second Presbyterian. Their visit led to serious talks between the churches, which eventually led to the Federation Agreement creating First Federated Church. The first joint service was held May 9, 1937, and on November 17, 1937, both congregations ratified the Federation Agreement, which allowed each congregation to keep their denominational identity. The congregation would worship at what is now called the Cornerstone Building on the corner of Madison and Jackson until a new house of worship could be built. The Hibben and Thompson memorial windows were removed from the Cornerstone Building and placed in the chapel of the newly constructed First Federated Church. Funds for the move were provided by a nephew of the Reverend Thompson and from the estate of Pastor Thompson's widow, Mary Thompson. The former Second Presbyterian Church building was sold in December of 1949 to the Electra chapter of the Order of Eastern Star and became known as the Donmeyer Temple after Isaac Donmeyer, the gentleman who donated the money needed for the purchase. From a frontier river town to the present, the roots of First Federated Church can be seen. Through the years and over a winding trail, New England Congregationalists with a strong bent for abolition and mission married stoic, frugal Scotch Presbyterians. First Federated Church is the child of their marriage.